What's up, everybody? Orange and Black Insider Friday. That means listener questions live, and I think I startled John there in the opener when I with the music there. I saw you jump, buddy.
Wasn't even fully awake yet. Jeez, man.
Neither am I. Happy Friday to you, man. How you doing? Aside from a little startled.
I'm good now. I'm awake. I'm alert. We got some questions to get to for sure.
Who needs coffee when we can blast you with some podcast music? That's for sure. Well, happy Friday to everybody. Thanks for tuning in live. If you're joining us live, whether it's on our YouTube channel, Cincy Jungle's Facebook page, or one of our Twitter accounts, appreciate that. And those are one of the avenues in which you can get in touch with us for this episode to submit a question, live YouTube chat, an article on Cincy Jungle, one of our Twitter accounts, the OB Insider at gmail.com, call or text 949-542-6241. We've got a lot of different ways for you to get in touch with us. We're going to be here for a little bit answering your questions. A lot to talk about. Even since we took the air on Wednesday, some interesting developments. And hopefully you caught that show because we have Sam Hubbard on that episode, as well as a standalone episode of that interview with him, courtesy of Miller Lite. Great talking with him. We've had some cool guests over the past month and a half with on the show, which has been awesome. And we hope you've enjoyed that. We are trying to hammer you with content as the regular season is around the corner. And of course, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel. Icon is down below John and that SB Nation icon. So click that, subscribe, click the bell to be notified when we go live, when new content is available. Give a thumbs up and like the Cincy Jungle Facebook page. Follow us on Twitter at Cincy Jungle, and you can get all of the audio stuff on your favorite audio platform by subscribing to the Cincy Jungle podcast channel. And that is on Stitcher, iTunes, Spotify, Google, all of the major ones we're on there. So you can get this show, you can get Talking Football with Bengal Jim and Friends, as well as Coach Speak and Chalk Talk with Matt Minnick. And we have, John, man, we've I'm looking at the catalog of this week alone, man. We've got probably about 5 or 6 episodes. And then you include this one, we're looking at probably, I think this is our 5th or 6th, I think, of the week here. So trying to give the people a lot of content. Hopefully they enjoy it.
Give them what they want, man. Football season's ramping up. You got a content piece every single day. Get on it. What are you waiting for?
What are you waiting for? Well, we've got a couple of questions queued up. And the ones that will take priority are the ones in our YouTube chat. If you super chat those will take precedence over others. And that money that you would donate with a super chat would be going to the Pollock Family Foundation. GiveSendGo.com/Pollock Family Foundation. You can go there. We are supporting that charity for a while this year. So if you do want to donate, you can go directly there. Or if you want your question to get to the top and the front of the line here, super chat us, and that money will go to the Pollock Family Foundation. But John, you wanted, before we kind of address some of the questions, I've already got texts and an email and all kinds of different stuff going here. Before we do that, there were some helmets being swung yesterday at practice. What the hell happened? That was crazy yesterday.
It seems like we didn't even know what was going on while it was happening. And credit to Bengals media and the NFL media who were there trying to follow along just the pure chaos that was happening. I guess it started somewhat relatively tame as far as intra-squad skirmishes go. You had, after a Jamar Chase to Joe Burrow connection, La'el Collins and Rams defensive end Leonard Floyd were going back and forth, kind of chopping it up after the play. A little bit of pushing and shoving, whatever. It's preseason, it's training camp, that stuff happens. I think on the next play then, you had kind of, at first it was A'Shawn Robinson and La'el Collins initially getting into it, but then it transitioned to Floyd and Collins, and apparently they have some history together going back to when Floyd was with the Bears and Collins was with the Cowboys. I think they practiced against each other last year when the Cowboys and Rams had their intra-squad scrimmages going on in the preseason. So they have somewhat of a history. So it got a little chippy. For the second play in a row, Collins was in the middle of it. Eventually, they pulled Collins from the drill or 11 on 11s in place of Deontay Smith because tensions were kind of raised at that point. But it's still pretty run-of-the-mill type, bickering, melees or whatever, going back and forth. Then La'el Collins comes back onto the field. And at this point, it's like the fuse is already lit and there's a ton of dynamite in the middle of all of this. And it just took one more play up until La'el Collins, I guess, ended up with a helmet in his hands. And there was a big, fight going around everything. At the time, I guess it was told that Lael was swinging or throwing the helmet, and there was a picture of him in the middle of a pile with the helmet of a Rams player, but nothing really happened after that. I got the timeline of events mixed up. Then Lael leaves the field off after that happened, right? And then Deontay Smith goes on the field. Lael comes back, and this is when things went out of control. So there was just one play after Collins' return, and like Collins and Floyd are in the middle of it again, and the entire team is now in on this, right? And we've seen the video from Deep Payne Klein, who I think was in the family and friends section of the practice field, kind of watching this. And you see in the middle of all of this, Aaron Donald ends up with a Bengals helmet and starts swinging it, and it makes contact with at least one player. I've been able to discern with like 95% confidence that player was Cordell Volson based off of his what I think
that's what it looked like.
Number, number 67. And you could hear like the clank of his helmet against the other helmet. And then he was swinging around again. I don't think he was even aiming for any player in particular. He was just trying to make contact with whomever. He ends up on the ground. Things, continue to, go back and forth or whatever, but things eventually calm down after that. And then practice is over. Like they had, according to Zach Taylor, like maybe 3 more plays or reps to go through. So at that point, like there's nothing left to do. Like both teams are just kind of fed up with one another. It was something that was just boiling and boiling and boiling up to this crescendo. And yeah, I think at the time, like it seemed like between Lael and Floyd, things were kind of bad. And then this was just another thing kind of on top of it. And maybe Aaron Donald kind of came or found himself in the middle of it. So initially that was like my reaction, like, oh, this is just something that just kind of happens. But just seeing like the video evidence of what Donald was doing, I think we can discern that what he was doing was a little bit more egregious. And the fact that it didn't even seem to like involve him initially, and then he just kind of like lost control and did something that's pretty taboo in terms of what NFL player conduct is.
Especially when you go back to the whole Mason Rudolph, Myles Garrett thing from a couple of years ago now, where, you're swinging a helmet at a guy that doesn't have a helmet on and all kinds of, look, it was pretty ugly. It was, and you can blame Donald, you can blame whoever you want on that. It's pretty ugly. It did look like Volson was the guy that was getting swung at. You saw some stuff. I think it was Kappa and Karras earlier in the week getting up against Donald and others. And you mentioned the history between Collins and Leonard Floyd. So there's a lot of different moving parts here. The other aspect of it in general, John, is just, this is the end, it's kind of the dog days of summer, training camp, all that kind of stuff. And quite honestly, at practice, guys get chippy in general. You see your own teammates getting after each other. And now you've got this team coming in, you've got just another team, and it gets chippy. It gets even more chippy than it has been. And then you add the kind of the lighter fluid on the fire in terms of what happened earlier this year. The Bengals lose to this team in dramatic last-second fashion. What's kind of interesting to me, John, is that when you look at this, the Bengals, I said, I got a text earlier today from a friend of mine who's also a Bengals fan, and he said, man, I loved what I saw at practice. Well, I'll touch on that in just a second, but we've heard all spring and summer how the Bengals have been a bit buttoned up, and they've been a bit, hey, we're mellow, we're confident, we're just going to do our thing. You heard Sam Hubbard say it, you heard Cam Taylor-Britt say it on our show. All kinds of players have said this, that look, we're pretty confident about things. We're just going to go about things quietly and do our own thing. But you can kind of tell, at least from this, that these two teams and the Bengals, maybe in general, have a little bit of an extra, I don't know what you would call it, frustration, aggravation, whatever, with this team and losing to them a few months ago. I don't like seeing helmets being swung at people. I don't like hearing about things being players doing dirty things in practice or anything like that. But in a way, John, and I don't like dirty stuff. That's not my thing. But I like the fire. I like seeing the fire. I like seeing a little bit of the, we're not really cool with what happened a few months ago. We're going back to business. We're doing all these things, but we're not that stoked on being runners up last year. And we don't really like this team, given what transpired just a few months ago. So, and then you've got the new guys on the offensive line who are set to protect Joe Burrow kind of in the middle of this scrum against arguably the best player in the league in Aaron Donald. So there are aspects. I like the fire. I like some of that stuff. I don't like the dirtiness. I don't like seeing helmets being flung around and swung at players. So I hope what I'm saying is making sense to you and to others when I'm relaying it. But I just from having this low key buttoned up approach all off season and see this, especially against this team, I kind of like to see elements of that fire, not how it all played out on Thursday.
Yeah, I guess in general principle, I agree with you 100%. Like, I think as long as everyone came away kind of unscathed and no one was harmed, like the coaches kind of, take this with a grain of salt. Like, yeah, this is what happens. And it's nice to see that passion and fire. I guess what bothers me about a lot of this is just the stuff that we don't know. And there is that general assumption that, yeah, the Bengals are kind of mad about the Super Bowl. And, they're kind of taking out that frustration in ways where it just fit what was happening during practice. The thing with me is that Le'el didn't play in the Super Bowl. And he has that aforementioned history with Leonard Floyd. And that could have just been the crux of the whole thing. It's just a personal beef with someone that you've known from the past. And like that honestly could be what it is. And people kind of ran with it saying, oh, Le'el is just, instilling this attitude of not taking any crap from opponents. And that also could be a contributing factor. But at the end of the day, we don't know how this all started. Apparently, it was Leonard Floyd was kind of beating Le'el Collins in some of those individual drills, and it was carrying over to 11-on-11 working. It could just been Le'el just getting fed up, and he just kind of lost his temper. So that sticks in my mind. But also just the fact that I get it that we can discern the difference between what Donald did and what Floyd and Collins were doing, but I feel like if people are going to be okay with the previous interactions and the things that led up to the Donald incident, then it's hard for me to be like, oh yeah, we can stand on a soapbox and just label Donald as the villain, even though things were like escalating to that inevitable point. And especially with Le'el still on the field, like that's a target for the Rams after everything that was happening. So I'm not scapegoating for Donald. I'm not saying what he did was right. I'm saying that it makes sense to me, as egregious as it was, it makes sense to me why things got to that point because of everything that was happening. It's not like players in the moment saying, okay, we got to calm down. We can't go overboard. Like when you're in that moment, especially we've seen this happen multiple times just this preseason, but like teams going too far and just, resulting to brawls and melees in these scrimmages. It seems like an inevitability at that point. Obviously, again, the incident was a little overboard, but I understand how it got to that point.
I do too. And it's, again, I think it's part of it of finally going up against another team in practice. I mean, practice is never as fun as the games, and the games themselves have been pretty clean from both teams in the first 2 weeks. From all teams, rather, in the first 2 weeks from what we've seen in the Bengals preseason game. So this kind of stuff hasn't been happening. It's just this team. It's the star players. It's the new players. It's going up in practice against another team. And of course, like you said, maybe some other contributing factors, history, maybe Collins not being pleased about the fact that he's being beaten. Honestly, there might be a little bit, I don't know if this was a conscious thing or maybe I'm just grasping at straws and saying this, but in baseball, when your manager comes out and puts on a big show and a charade arguing with the umpire about specific calls and that sort of thing, and it supposedly shows it's instead of just really pushing to have a call changed or that sort of thing, or calls being changed going forward in that game, it's also a little bit of a show that, hey, I've got my players' backs. Yeah. Maybe there's a little bit of that going on here too. I don't know if that makes any sense to anybody, but a lot of different things, some ugliness to it, some factors I do like, kind of not being pushed around. I like that sort of mentality, but you got to be able to rein that in. And that's been honestly part of a thing under Zach Taylor, as opposed to Marvin Lewis, where a lot of these dumb penalties, these after the whistle penalties have been extremely limited. And some of these off-field issues, all that stuff have been extremely limited. So hopefully this isn't a trend and this is just kind of a blip on the radar here. But undoubtedly, we've already kind of got some questions on those incidents, and undoubtedly we'll get more, but we wanted to touch on that to start the show. John, I want to go here because this is a very generous donation from Mr. Whisper, and Mr. Whisper is always someone that seems to be donating via super chat in the season, all kinds of things, whether it's to us or to a charity like the Pollock Foundation. So Pollock Family Foundation. So very generous here. Good question here about Trey Hill. Trey Hill's play has been impressive in the preseason, and Dave Lapham said similar praise. Have you noticed the same, and why do you think he isn't in the left guard battle with Carmen struggling and Volson learning as a rookie?
Well, I think it comes down to Trey Hill being the backup center and the fact that they appreciate that depth. And I can't think of another guy who's likely to make the 53 who can also snap or has experience playing center. So, like, that was the whole thing with Ted Karras. There was the argument of, having played left guard, bring in a center like a Tyler Linderbaum and have him be like an emergency center. Well, Trey Hill's he's the emergency center right now. And if he's not completely noticeably better than both Jackson Carman and Corda Volson, and he might be better than Jackson Carman at this point, but if he's not like by far and away like the best option and gives them like an above average starter there, then he's probably better as that first interior lineman off the bench who can play all three spots. But most importantly, if something happens to Karras, like, they need someone who can snap it.
That's primary reason number one that I would agree with you as well. And there's value, whether you think he could start at left guard or be in the competition or whatever, there's value in being a backup center and an emergency guy that can play a couple of different spots on the line. He has looked better this year. But, John, there's a thing with Trey Hill and Jackson Carman as opposed to Volson where the Bengals have this weird situation where, because of injuries and other kinds of situations, they have sample sizes on Jackson Carman and Trey Hill, and it's not very big for either of them, and it's not very good for either of them in terms of regular season games. When Trey Hill has been in regular season games, there's a lot of penalties. There's a lot of issues there. So they may feel like, hey, even though he's showing some growth this second season in Trey Hill, we kind of saw a little bit of what he is going to be against regular season starters. I don't know, but again, I think the primary reason in general, though, is just, look, he's got value as our backup center and backup swing interior lineman. And, if we have to play him in a pinch, we will, and we'll rely on him. But, and hope that this improvement that we've seen in the preseason will carry over. But in the regular season last year, he was kind of a little bit of a penalty machine.
Yeah, a lot of a penalty machine. It was like once every 5 snaps, it seemed like he was getting flagged. So, yeah, I feel like if he was a left guard primarily, he would definitely be in the battle, and he might even be winning the battle based off the progress that he's made. And I think he's made good progress enough to the point where he's that first guy to come off the bench. It's not Jackson Carman, or it shouldn't be Hakeem Adeniji if he's going to be continuing at guard. It's Trey Hill, and I think there's value to that for being a 6th-round pick.
Absolutely. Let's get to another, because we said, hey, we're going to prioritize these, and we did get a text, and thanks for the little poke reminder there, Dustin, and for the donation. Dustin from Salt Lake City, good place. I've been around there, visited. Nice area in Utah there. I feel like the NFL model, this is an intense question here, a good one. I feel like the NFL model is broken, but great for parity. I simply cannot find a scenario where you can build a consistent Super Bowl contender when you have massive quarterback contracts and wide receiver contracts. On one hand, it places emphasis on player development, but that contradicts what a lot of people say in needing to spend in free agency because player development is difficult. Willie Anderson has even said how coaches simply don't have time for player development, and now with essentially limited off seasons, you can barely get your hands on players. Like Dick Vermeil said in his interview during the Hall of Fame game, you don't get better by doing less. Thoughts? I'm going to tee this up by saying this. There was, I think it was by Ben Solak, now with The Ringer. He put out a really interesting article on this. I'll have to find the link and I'll share it with everybody there so you can, it's on The Ringer. I don't normally regularly read the Ringer, admittedly, but I thought it was a very interesting article on the Cincinnati Bengals. And it's the title's a little misleading because it's like, why aren't the Bengals going all in on free agency and all this kind of stuff? And it talks about the history of the Bengals, why they don't necessarily need to because of the friendly contracts they have with the nucleus on offense, with major contributing players right now. There's a lot of different, and then obviously paying Joe Burrow going forward. So there's a lot of things with that, but I agree to an extent that it's hard to create a consistent Super Bowl contender a la the Patriots in the mid 2000s, late 2000s, that sort of thing, I guess, based on where the NFL is headed with quarterback and wide receiver contracts. But I think they're, not only is it maybe the Bengals lay out the blueprint, maybe another team does, but you're still seeing teams being able, and not necessarily the New Yorks, the Dallas Cowboys, that sort of thing. I mean, Kansas City's in the mix. So they've paid their quarterback a ton. The Kansas City's in the mix every year. There are a number of other teams you see get through every year. The Ravens seem to be in the mix every year. The Steelers. So it really comes down to organization, how the organization is run, and you got to get the figureheads in place in order to, and that's head coach and quarterback. You have to have the right synergy and the right people there in order for your team to consistently be there. Hopefully the Bengals have that. I think we're pretty sold right now on both of those spots for the Bengals right now. Reed and Mahomes have shown that. Obviously Harbaugh and whoever he has at quarterback has shown that over a number of years. Tomlin, the same thing. So, if you have that quarterback, if you have the head coach, you're going to be set up pretty well. You got to have a star wide receiver. The Bengals have a few. And then of course, at that point you can say, look, I think it's a pick your poison. We're going to invest heavily on the offense and make sure we have the right head coach. And then we're just going to keep drafting defense and then, kind of do what we can in free agency. Or you say, we're going to pay the quarterback. We're just going to keep drafting wide receiver, add pieces in free. I mean, there's a couple of different approaches, but it's going to be difficult for a lot of teams right now to be able to pay huge money to a quarterback, huge money to a wide receiver or more than one wide receiver. And then also, let's get a premier edge rusher. Let's go out in free agency, get a premier, tackle, that sort of thing. You're going to have to kind of pick your poison, in my opinion, in order to create this perennial contender in today's NFL.
I think it's, at least for the last 20, 25 years, it's been equally tough to build a perennial contender because, I'll just say it. I feel like for as great as Tom Brady is, he definitely skewed the perception of what greatness, and the Patriots in general skewed the perception, in my opinion, of like what a great NFL team is in the modern era of football, because Tom Brady, he never took a ton of money per year from the Patriots, and he was always, they were always able to continue supplanting talent around him. And for various reasons why Tom decided to do that, he might be married to a multi-millionaire model, but that's beside the point. Regardless, the Patriots are such a huge outlier, and people look at them as the bar for perennial success. And I don't think that should be the standard for anyone. The fact that the Kansas City Chiefs made 3 consecutive AFC championships, went to 2 Super Bowls, and won a Super Bowl, to me, that's insanely difficult. That's even beyond the standard. And they pale in comparison to what the Patriots did in 20 years with Brady and Belichick. So when it comes to now that you have contracts that are more aggressive in terms of paying the player up front with guaranteed escrowed cash and everything like that, it seems more difficult on the surface, but I feel like it's just really hard to not only win a Super Bowl, but to win multiple. And the Patriots did it in a way that I don't think will ever be done again. And that shouldn't, I guess in my mind, that's what I think of when people think of continued success. And I just don't think it's ever going to be emulatable again. And I don't think it has a ton to do with the way that contracts are going. I think it's already been really tough, but I think you hit the nail on the point. Whenever you have that quarterback, you're always going to be in contention to do something meaningful. And that's why the Bengals, their number one priority is to retain Burrow. And whether or not they lose a receiver in either T. Higgins or Jamar Chase, if they keep one, that will also help keep the window alive, because it's the 2 most important positions on the offensive side of the ball, and offense is king and will probably remain king for a long time in the NFL. So if you have those pieces and you're able to continue to draft well and also utilize free agency the way that the Bengals have been doing, where it's not just throwing a ton of total money out there, but it's finding value and getting guys who supersede the paper monetary value that they have onto the field by playing, I guess, above their contract level. As long as you're able to do that to a certain extent with that quarterback, I think you are doing just as well as anyone else is at maintaining a window and sustaining success.
Kind of a nuance to what I said about just kind of I threw out a blanket statement about the organization. Well, with that comes the ability to draft effectively. And it seems, under Zach Taylor. Now, granted, the Bengals stumbled into some high picks, so they were able to grab a lot of talented players in the first couple of draft classes from Zach Taylor. But it seems as if, for the most part, they are drafting much more effectively.
Yeah.
Outside of, a lot of the 2019 class. But I mean, the 2020 class looks exceptional right now. The 21 class, there's a lot of contributors there, including Jamar Chase. And, you've already seen some good things out of Dax Hill, and you've got high hopes for others in this class here. So, the big swings and misses are fewer and far between with the Bengals than they were in the later years of Marvin Lewis, and throughout really the scattered years of Marvin Lewis. You're going to miss on guys. That's just how it goes, but you can't miss on the very high picks, and you can't miss on, the other picks. Now, when you look around the NFL, to your point, who's kind of been the perennial since the Belichick Brady divorce, I guess, who's been kind of the perennial powerhouses? You look at the Chiefs. The Bills are kind of in that, well, are they consistent or on that cusp that, they're kind of in it. The 49ers over the last few years have been in it. The Packers over the last few years have been in it. I mean, they're, again, the Ravens, the Steelers, and now you've got the Bengals who, are they on that cusp of being a consistent contender? You would like to think so after everything they showed last year. And there are a couple of other teams, but what's the consistent factor there? The coach and the quarterback in a lot of those situations. So that's kind of what it comes down to. But excellent question there by Dustin. Where do you want to go next, John?
So we had another generous donation from Mr. Whisper, and he's asking, what are your thoughts on Alan George, an undrafted free agent at cornerback? He is apparently impressing a lot of people. Are you seeing and hearing the same? So, Anthony, what are your thoughts on Alan George through 2 preseason games?
I mean, I've seen some things I like. There are a couple of things that, both he and Delonte Hood, they've had some nice moments. They've had some moments also where you go, okay, that's where the inexperience comes in here. I think we're looking at a developmental player. Maybe he's a guy that they like to keep, some of these guys around for a while. They've done this before. You've seen Winston Rose and others that they've kind of hung on to and tried to work with here. So that's where I kind of see here, because I think the top of the defensive back group is pretty set. And then we talked last Wednesday about the emergence of Jalen Davis, right? So a guy that I think is making a strong case to get onto the roster. So there just may not be current room here, but it could be one of those guys they hang on to develop. They've done that with some other secondary players. That's just kind of my initial impressions of him.
Yeah, I think Alan George has done a lot in training camp and preseason to make his claim, or to stake his claim for the roster, especially just being an undrafted guy at a position that's really tough to play for a rookie. So the fact that he was playing ahead of Cam Taylor-Britt in practice at one point, obviously showing enough to the coaches that he deserves some of those reps. I think that speaks a lot. I also, just with this discussion specifically in terms of like if he makes the roster and if he's impressed enough, I think it depends on what type of depth that they're looking to keep, because it could come down to a decision between Alan George and like Jalen Davis. We talked about Jalen Davis in our weekly show a couple days ago, but he's mainly just a slot cornerback. If they need depth on the boundary, George has been playing on the boundary, and I think personally he's done okay. Like, he's done well enough to continue staying with the team at a certain capacity. I think he's really good at kind of identifying the ball deep on those vertical routes. He's a little bit rough around the edges, defending stuff underneath, but that kind of comes to the territory of an undrafted player in his rookie season. So if the Bengals decide that, there's enough here that he's shown that, he's worthy of being on the roster in some capacity, and we need depth behind guys like Awuzie and Eli Apple because Taylor-Britt is hurt, then I can see him having done enough to make the team. And there's a great article on Cincy Jungle right now where you can read my thoughts on the matter and Coach Matt Minnick's thoughts and Drew Garrison's thoughts. And Matt did stake his claim for Alan George to make the team because of what he's done in the preseason this year. So yes, I do think he's impressed. I think his standing in the roster is validated, but beyond that, we'll just have to wait and see what the coaches decide.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that there's obviously the difference that George has been playing on the outside. Davis is more the inside slot corner. It's more just, how many do you keep at that position group in general was kind of my thinking with that. But I think what you said also, there's one kind of, in my estimation, right now, there's one kind of pathway where he can sneak onto the final roster, and that is uncertainty with Taylor Britt and his injury. So, we've seen this before with other injuries. Oh, it's going to be a couple weeks. Oh, everything's going fine. So I would love to see Taylor Britt in there. I would love to see him contribute as a rookie. I have high hopes for him. But if there is a setback, if there is a longer rehab process than anticipated, maybe that is where Alan George sneaks his way onto the roster. But as of now, I think the Bengals have, a lot of those questions answered for now. But he has impressed, especially for being an undrafted guy and a guy that not a lot of people knew going into this spring and summer. And, he's made a name for himself. So at a minimum, I think he's definitely deserving of a spot on the practice squad to develop and potentially continue with the Bengals. I think there's some good clay to mold there. I'll let you go again since I took the first few there, John. If you see one that we need to get to, we do have texts and other things that are coming in as well. But what do you see in here?
So we had a question from Mark Fry, who's asking about the punter competition. I've always been a Huber fan, like myself and like you, Anthony, but as he says, all good things do eventually come to an end. I really don't know. I want to say that it's leaning towards Chrisman just because he hasn't necessarily screwed up in the preseason, and maybe that's the dynamic of what they've been looking for. Like they're going to give him equal opportunities or even more opportunities than Huber, see what he does with it. So long as he doesn't, kind of piss his pants a little bit, he gets the job just because there's that value of upside and youth, everything that goes with replacing a 37-year-old player, regardless of the position that he plays. So the fact that he hasn't done anything that stood out negatively, he hasn't been perfect. I think he himself said that it's the hang time that's more important than just how far down the field you can punt it. So like the distance of how far he's punting hasn't been the issue. Maybe the hang time is where he needs to improve a little bit, but I don't think that's enough to sway them back to Huber if they were already, giving Chrisman every single chance to, take this job and run with it. I think he's done enough if that's their thinking, but unfortunately, we just don't know their thinking. We're not going to know until they make the decision next week. But I would say if I were to lean one way, it's Chrisman. But I am not confident enough to say that to write it in with Sharpie right now.
You all come to this show for strong opinions, observations, astute analysis, all kinds of things. And what you're going to get from this question, Mark Fry, is 2 I don't knows.
Yeah.
That's I've got an I don't know on this one either. Or also, but I mean, it's just like part of me thinks because of who Darren Simmons has shown who he is as a special teams coordinator, it's consistency. It's sticking with people it's sticking with people you trust, and all of that. So I can see how and why Huber would have the upper hand here, or the upper leg, so to speak. I mean, let's be honest. Drew Chrisman has bid his time to, based on everything he has been through with this team, on and off the roster, on and off the practice squad. He has done everything that he has been asked and then some to earn his shot here. The thing I will say about this, John, is number one, there's 2 things. Number one, isn't it great that we're talking about a punting competition and not about what's going to happen at right tackle, what's going to happen at right guard, what's going to happen at left guard, like we've done over the past handful of years. Who else is going to step up? Where else do we have? It's nice to have this kind of discussion instead of so many other unsettled starting positions. Number 2, what I want to say is, and I've kind of hinted at this, I think last Wednesday, but this element of the Bengals in terms of punting the football may not be as huge of a role on this year's team as a lot of people think it is. I think they're going to go for 4th downs a lot, as long as it's not outrageous yardage and you're at your own 5-yard line or something like that. I think you're going to see them go for 4th downs a lot if it's manageable. I think you're going to see them trot out Evan McPherson for 50+ yard field goals a lot, regardless of the weather, venue, etc. So yes, you need a punter. Yes, you need an able one. Yes, you need to have one that works well with the special teams unit, but I don't know how big of a role the punter will have on the 2022 Bengals this year.
And it's also punting it far and having hang time is important, but also an aspect of that is, punting inside the 20, placing opposing offenses close to the goal line. And to your point, when you have both an aggressive play calling head coach that likes to go for it in certain situations and a kicker that can kick from beyond 60, like how many times are you punting towards or near the middle of the field trying to get the opposing team inside the 10? Like those opportunities, like you said, are going to decrease this year. So it's not, I don't want to say like negating the importance of a punter or diminishing the importance, but you're right. When you have an offense like this and a mindset to go for it and to kick long field goals, it definitely matters a little bit less compared to recent years.
Let's get to a couple quick ones, and then we've got Mr. Generosity, aka Mr. Whisper, with another super chat here. And hey, if you want your voice heard, give us a super chat as well. 859. Do you think Joe Burrow will play Saturday in the preseason game at all against the Rams, John?
I think there's a better likelihood that a fan charges the field with 2 Rams helmets and charges Aaron Donald than Joe Burrow snapping in Saturday.
Yeah. Given what happened in practice on Thursday, it's like part of me is like, hey, get a series in there, Joe, just kind of get warmed up and comfortable. But given what happened this week, I'm like, don't even. I don't even want him in there. Let's not even, you're playing with fire there. So I don't think so. And then we had a funny one up here because of Mr. Joe Burrow, a nice segue question. Terry King here. Is it Kroger or Kroger's? I got news for you folks out in Southern California. I think it's Kroger. I think I say Kroger's, but I think it's Kroger. That's just me. But Kroger owns a large grocery chain out here called Ralph's. So I don't have Kroger. I have Ralph's, just like I think you guys have Safeway, right?
No idea what that is.
Okay. Safeway is another large grocery chain that owns Vaughn's, which is our
also
Safeway.
Don't know what that is.
Yeah. So when you go into a Vaughn's or let's say you go into a Ralph's,
okay, and
they have their brand, their brand stuff is Kroger. So that's what Ralph's is out here. It's our Kroger. But my understanding, Terry, and John can answer this far better than I can, is that it's Kroger no S, just like Burrow no S.
Is it the Mandela effect where you think you like know something, but it's not, like another group of people?
Is that really it? Yeah.
I've never noticed an S at the end of Kroger's name. So it's not. It's just Kroger. I think when people say it, it's just like the possessive now, like Kroger's like products or something like that. So maybe that's where people get confused, or it's just the same thing with putting an S on the end of Joe Burrow's name. Like Burrows ends up being something that people say a lot, but I think it's just also just that possessive thing. So yeah, it's Kroger singular, not plural.
That's how I have it. All right, let's get to Mr. Whisper, who says he thinks he's got a steak dinner for us at this point. Well, I got news for you, Mr. Whisper. This isn't going to a fillet for John and I. This is going to the Pollock Family Foundation. So appreciate your generosity. Regardless, leaving out the H boys being Hubbard and Hendrickson, how is our pass rush looking right now? Is Osai, Carter, Gunter, etc. bringing it, in your opinion? Do they still need work? Yes and yes. Go listen to our interview and or a write-up on Cincy Jungle with our interview with Sam Hubbard, who you can hear from his mouth about these guys. He has been pleasantly surprised with these guys, per his words. Now, he's going to talk up his teammates, undoubtedly. We know that. But him using the phrase pleasantly surprised, kind of, oh, okay, I like hearing that, because maybe he didn't have that high of expectation. He thought that a lot of the snaps are going to be on he and Hendrickson again this year without Ogunjobi back in the fold. But he likes what he has seen from those. And by the way, name not mentioned by Mr. Whisper, Cam Sample, we found out that he had been working out with Sam Hubbard over the offseason. I didn't know that, at least before talking to him. So he's saying, and Sample has looked improved this preseason as well. So, I think Osai is still kind of getting back into things after that really strong debut last year, and then obviously missing the entire year. So I think that's going to be a slower ramp up there. But when that gets going, I think everybody's going to be excited about that. You hope for some improvement from Sample. Carter's going to be a movable piece. Gunter has shown a couple of things. No more Wyatt Hubert. Questions about Khalid Kareem. So there's a lot of stuff to sort out here, John.
Yeah, I think it's right now, it's hard for me to answer the question because of the Osai factor. He's taken 13 snaps as a pass rusher through 2 games. That's all we have on him. And going back to Tampa Bay, that was a year ago, but he looked good. But I feel like the group that they have right now, you got Khalid Kareem, Cam Sample, Jeff Gunter. They're all very similar stylistically as pass rushers. They're power guys. They're not really guys that can, kill you off the edge with like this explosion, right? They can't bend under, tackles and, bend around the edge. I feel like if any one of these guys can do that, it's Osai, and we haven't really seen him fully unleashed yet. And I feel like that is the missing link to this group of pass rushers. It's what Carl Lawson, to an extent, brought when he was here. So they had, obviously Hendrickson and Hubbard, they're great in their own right, but having that third guy that adds another dimension is definitely the thing that can elevate the group to where it needs to be, because they need to be better at rushing the passer than they were last year beyond just Hendrickson. So to me, Osai is that variable, and we haven't truly seen, him fully unleash it because they're easing him back. So until we see him in the regular season completely, leash off, go attack the passer in ways that you can, maybe we'll get more clarity on this. But I feel like the guys they have are fine. It's just, I think they are looking for that extra boost.
They are definitely looking for that extra boost. And should they get that, I think that's going to, they've got the vast majority of the defense intact minus Ogunjobi. You've got some other additions and different players, but they're going to need to get some more, not only to relieve and bring an extra, kind of niche aside from Hendrickson and Hubbard, but they're going to need to make up for what Ogunjobi brought. What did he have last year? 7 sacks, 6 sacks, something like that. So, they're going to need to piece that together from a number of different players, not only from the outside, but also people who can rush on the inside. So they're going to need to figure that out and, get some additional pressure, take some of that relief on themselves, as opposed to putting it all on Hendrickson and Hubbard. But I think there's a lot of upside. There's a lot of question marks at this point as well. So good question though, Mr. Whisper. Thank you so much for your generosity today. That's going to go help out the Pollock Family Foundation. Got an email, John, and this one's for you, my friend.
Oh boy.
It is titled, it's from Clifford. Cincy Connection is the title of the email. UC, University of Cincinnati, had 8 players drafted this year, which rivals Bama, Ohio State, etc. Punter Kevin Huber is the only Bearcat on the Bengals roster. Now that UC is becoming a perennial top 25 team, will the Bengals look more closely at drafting from Clifton? Or would it would have been awesome to have traded up for Sauce Gardner or Kobe Bryant, or have Jerome Ford, Alex Pierce fill roles on the squad. But basically, is this now going to be a well wherein the Bengals, that UC being that well, is this going to be a well wherein the Bengals start tapping it a little bit more often? There are players I can remember. Oh gosh, who was that wide receiver? They had a running back a few years back. There was a wide receiver. I think the Rams had him. He was a good return man as well. He's probably like 10 years ago now.
Isaiah Peed, Marty Gilliard?
Yeah. Both those guys, Marty Gilliard and Isaiah Peed. Thank you. Yes. Those were, Bengals fans were drooling over those guys. The Bengals didn't go that route. They have much more frequently gone with the Ohio State guys. But do you see now the Bengals going after UC, or is it because they like those big schools and those players from the big conferences, big schools? Are they going to still kind of shy away from that?
I will say I still stand by that they should have drafted Connor Barwin over Ray Maluga.
Yeah,
but that's just that was just me. Even though Ray Maluga was amazing in college. Mm-hmm. So the thing with this is, for one, I don't think the Bengals are scared or they're not hesitant to draft from anywhere anymore. I feel like there's always been the thing where they prioritize Power 5 schools, and I feel like they've kind of drifted away from that bias in recent years. Obviously, Cordell Volson from North Dakota State, even Cam Sample from like Tulane being a 4th round pick. That still seemed very early for like the traditional Bengals to steer away from some of the big programs. They've always been Alabama, Georgia, plenty of guys on the roster from those schools in the past. So I feel like UC being like good now, a consistent top 25 team. I like the sound of that. I feel like that doesn't necessarily increase the chance of Bearcats becoming Bengals, but also the more important thing to me, they have 2 coaches on the staff that have been with UC at a certain point. Zach Taylor was the offense coordinator there, and Doug Rossfeld, who's never talked about because he's not technically a coach, but he's like the director of coaching operations. He was with UC with Zach Taylor as well. So they have connections to the campus. They live right next to the campus. They always are in person for pro days and I'm sure many scouting trips. So yes, as UC's talent pool increases, there's a conversation to be had about, drafting those guys kind of earlier, or just not just being like college free agents or anything like that. So yes, naturally I think it increases, but I don't think they were ever, like, I guess, shy or afraid of taking guys from like group of 5 schools anyways. And especially the fact that being in Cincinnati, they have connections to these guys probably on a personal level too. They're able to, find out, their livelihood, their childhood, their everything that they care about before drafting these guys. So that definitely helps too.
Yeah, and then of course they always have the local, what is it, the local tryout, the local practice day, or right around the mini camp stuff. So, I mean, they always give other guys a look that aren't drafted, that are from local schools and stuff. And usually they bring in a couple of those guys throughout, the training camp, preseason, OTAs, that sort of thing. A couple guys get their shot. And it's not just UC guys; it's also local kids from local high schools and that sort of thing. So, I mean, they do their part. Obviously, I understand that people want more because of what the University of Cincinnati has shown, and it has been quite impressive. Side note: John knows last year when I went out to the game against the Vikings, I did catch a UC game. I think they were playing, who was it, Kent State, or I forget who it was. They were playing.
Don't remember.
Murray State.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, they walloped them, but heck of an awesome experience, really cool. And you can tell that the city, the greater area, is really rallying around the Bearcats, which is really cool. And they had a special season last year. So I think more good things are to come. I really like their head coach. And, I think, like you said, there are some connections there that can't really be denied, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, so we had a question from Alex Duggins, which I think is worth bringing up now because of the new topic. But he's asking, what would it take for the front office to give Jesse Bates a big long-term contract? And Anthony, I know we've talked ad nauseum about Jesse Bates, but I feel like there's an angle that we can take here to really, enlighten this part of the conversation, because now Bates isn't eligible for an extension or any type of contract until he enters free agency next year. Now the Bengals can tag him and whatnot, but they've rarely ever double tagged a player, and rarely does that even happen in the NFL in general. So in all likelihood, like, they're going to have like a window to extend him off of that free agency or the franchise tag, or he's just going to enter free agency. And that comes at a terrible timing for Jesse Bates to remain with the Bengals, because what it would have taken for this to have already happened was the Bengals offering more money up front in terms of guaranteed money. And they just weren't comfortable doing that, or they were incapable of doing that. We still don't have a full, clear picture of their financial details. But next year, with both Joe Burrow and T. Higgins needing contracts, needing money up front, needing cash on hand to complete those contracts, which they definitely want to do that next year. Even with the Bengals bringing in more money through sponsorships and the stadium name, I just don't think there's any part of the pie there for Jesse Bates at this point. I think this situation has played out to the point where Dax Hill takes over from next year. Jesse Bates gets the contract that he deserves from another team, and they use whatever money that they can scramble together to pay for T. Higgins and Joe Burrow, most importantly, Joe Burrow. So I think whatever that happened, I think the fact that timing now, there's just not enough cash for Bates at this point.
Agree with you. And it's also a relative term when you say a big long-term contract. The Bengals likely feel that they've put a big long-term contract for them on the table for him. So what it's going to take for the Bengals at this point to re-sign Jesse Bates to a big long-term contract is for him to likely accept something that is on the table and or very similar, because Jesse Bates on the field somehow has a subpar year this year. That's honestly what it would take at this point. I think at this point, the Bengals have offered what they're going to offer. They may up it a little bit. They may tweak it a tiny bit, but they'll probably re-offer something. They want him here, but I think they will probably re-offer him something like that, kind of knowing that it probably isn't going to be taken. And that's that. And they've probably got that contract, obviously, based on how they've structured it and what they had in mind this last summer and up to the point that they can negotiate with him for the franchise tag. They had a number in mind. They had the salary cap figures in mind with the contracts that you mentioned coming around the block with Higgins and Burrow. So they had it. These are the Brown family, and the organization is very astute in working the salary cap. Very rarely, if ever, are they in salary cap hell or anything like that. So obviously what they had on the table is going to be, it was structured in with the other contracts they have coming up in mind.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's just kind of obvious. So for a big long-term contract for Jesse Bates and the Bengals, the only way I see that happening is that it's considered what they have on the table or something very similar to it is a big long-term contract. And Bates does not play very well or as a subpar year this year and decides that the market has dried up a little bit for him based on other safeties getting paid a lot of big money and other teams maybe not needing a safety as much going forward next year. That's the only way, kind of a lot of moving parts there. That's really the only way that I see this happen. And then you go, okay, well, if he doesn't have a great year and the Bengals have the leverage hand here, I mean, is that same contract even valid? Is that same contract even worth what you're? So there's other questions that go with that. But all in all, you hope Bates has a good year. You hope he gets paid very handsomely the following offseason. If that's with the Bengals, great. It's likely that it's not going to be with the Bengals. And, you just hope for him personally and on the business side, he gets a good contract and he plays well, stays healthy this year.
Yeah, I think if he doesn't play that well, if he plays even worse than last year, it's not that the Bengals can offer him less. It's that the Bengals won't offer him at all. They just won't value him at that price point. And then he will get whatever deal, probably a similar deal to what he would have gotten regardless from another team, just because he's a 26-year-old safety that has like ability. Like he either plays well and takes the deal that he declined for the past year and a half, or he doesn't, and then the Bengals just aren't even interested at all.
Right. Let's see if we've got a couple of other questions before we get on out of here. Good question there, though. And really, what would it take? What else would it take for the front office to give Jesse Bates a big long-term contract? I mean, really, it would take a tweaking of how they view the safety position and what they value paying it. I mean, that's just kind of it would take a realignment of their vision of that. There was one from this one was pretty good, and this we'll start closing up here because we're going a lot longer here. From Dan the Man in the live YouTube chat, Ken Riley's got one foot in the Hall of Fame, deservedly so. What can be / is being done to promote Ken Anderson's candidacy? Number 14 was the best quarterback of his era, with the possible exception of Roger Staubach and maybe Fran Tarkenton.
Man, like I feel as more Bengals get inducted, maybe it's a combo of Ken Riley and Willie Anderson this year that definitely paints Ken Anderson in a greater light. As far as like, I feel like the Bengals fans have done a great job of spearheading this. Like there's an account called like @Bengals Hall of Fame that always posts stats and promotes, Ken Anderson and Ken Riley for that matter. So I feel like there's been a lot of grassroots development on that side of things. But it does come down to like how much support that they have in the voting room. And I want to say Bengal Jim has been kind of highlighting, former players that have been advocating for these guys. I think it's mainly been Ken Riley of recently. So with Ken Anderson, though, like as a quarterback who didn't win a Super Bowl, it's always going to be tough. And that's always going to be like a conversation that creates division between the people who end up deciding on this. But yeah, as more time goes along and there's more Bengals, hopefully in the Hall of Fame, I think it gets easier. I also think Paul Dana Jr. brought up a great point about this when Riley was announced as one of the finalists. Ken Anderson equally deserves that recognition, and to be where Ken Riley is now, I do wonder if, and this is what Dana said, that they didn't want to have two Bengals be 2 of the 3 finalists because they just wanted those other guys from other franchises to have that shine in the spotlight. So maybe that was a factor into it. I feel like where Ken Anderson is now is pretty good in terms of the progress, him being one of those 12 or 14 semifinalists, and it just might take a little bit more time. But I don't think there's anything more that the fans or the team needs to do or can do to promote what everyone already should know.
Right. Bengal Jim and Jamie, James, Tom, who run Talking Football with Bengal Jim and friends. I mean, they do an excellent job of highlighting former players. I think, I don't know if I want to let the cat out of the bag, but one of those guys may or may not be behind that Bengals Hall of Fame Twitter account that you mentioned there, John. So They do a great job of highlighting players, giving them platforms not only on their show, but at the tailgates and all kinds of different things. So I think they do a good job. I think we've tried to do our part, not only on Cincy Jungle, but on this show, highlighting him and talking to him about Hall of Fame. And then, of course, the Bengals organization doing the right thing, finally putting him in the Ring of Honor, the inaugural class there. So all of those things bring, outside eyes, I guess, on Ken Anderson that maybe weren't there. And then, of course, it's just more team success right now. As much as it doesn't make sense, the more the team is successful right now, the more eyes go on the Cincinnati Bengals, more people learn about their history, more people learn about the players. That's just kind of how it goes. And then on top of that, John, you look at when Ken Anderson played, you look at some of the names there that are in that Dan mentioned, Staubach, Tarkenton. Anderson played in this era that he changed a lot of things, in terms of how downfield passing worked and everything. And he was kind of an innovative quarterback. Unfortunately for him, he was kind of his career overlapped a lot of star and big name players that because of team success, because of their own successes, etc., overshadowed him, right or wrong. I'm talking about Terry Bradshaw, who was in his own division, right? You got a guy like that playing over the many of the same years, along with those names. Then you've got Joe Montana, who comes along towards the end of Ken Anderson's great career, beats him in the Super Bowl. I mean, so there's just kind of a lot of unfortunate circumstances of when he played that also play into this thing that kind of gets him overshadowed a little bit. But I think he is deserving of that. I think, like you said, it's going to take him a while longer, unfortunately. But I think he will eventually get in there, and hopefully the Bengals, the fans, and of course the team does their part on the field, off the field to help, bring awareness to great players like this. So it's a little unfortunate, but there are a lot of factors at play here, I think.
Yeah. And I think also like Football Outsiders, I posted the link there in the chat. They ran a great story about putting Anderson's career from a statistical perspective into context with the modern game and some of those modern metrics. And it really does stand out. And maybe, the more type of pieces that are released like this, the more that we learn about the intricacies of, the differences between playing then and playing now, and what stands out from a contextual standpoint. I feel like as that conversation evolves, it will eventually reach the doors of the Hall of Fame. But yeah, like it's unfortunately, I feel like the voting process hasn't really changed and the criteria hasn't really changed. And we've just heard a lot of not great things regarding the Bengals and that. So maybe until that sees like an overhaul, and maybe it never will, we won't see that much progress. But I feel like there has been some progress with Ken Anderson for sure.
Yeah, and I'm seeing a lot of stuff about, different quarterbacks. They won a Super Bowl. They're not getting in the Hall of Fame. Well, of course, but that's the imperfection of the Hall of Fame voting process. And that's there was someone, I forget who it was, but someone talked a lot about the fact that in the 70s and 80s, you basically had 4, 5, 6 teams that were always on national TV, and that was it. It was to a lesser extent the Vikings because they were good, but you had the Cowboys, the Steelers, the Raiders. Who else am I forgetting? Maybe the Rams in the early days because they had the fearsome foursome that you brought up the other night. There were a couple of teams that were just on all the time, and the Bengals just were not one of them. And those kinds of things also hurt candidacy, right or wrong. We don't make the rules here. We're just telling you that there are a lot of different factors that unfortunately hurt a player like Ken Anderson get his rightful place in the Hall of Fame, and we're just trying to bring awareness as to why. And that, by the way, great find on that link too, John. I've read that before on the Football Outsiders there, but we don't make the rules, guys. I mean, we're just relaying what we see and what we hear. And I know. I wish we did. Well, we've gone almost an hour. Any others you want to get to before we get on out of here, John? We got to a lot today. This show flew by. Any others you want to get to before we hop out of here, my friend?
Yeah, real quick. We had one from Dave Lennox half an hour ago. He's asking, if the season had to start today, would you guys be comfortable with Cordell Volson or Jackson Carman? If so, why? What improvements have you seen from them? I feel like this is pretty simple. Like it's Volson at this point. Just the fact that he's in the last week taking all the practice reps with the ones. He's started a full preseason game. He's got those reps in. We just haven't seen enough we have seen no improvements from Jackson Carman. Unfortunately, it was a weird conversation during training camp when he was the unquestioned starter there, but it was still a competition. And then he just did not perform when it mattered. And now he hasn't practiced with the ones in a while. So if it had to start now, like, you want the guy that's playing and practicing between the starters on the offensive line. So like it really is just an easy question right now. So until Volson completely screws it up, if that happens, it's him.
For the reasons you mentioned, and that last sentiment you mentioned, until he totally screws it up, that doesn't seem to be who Cordell Volson is totally screw up. The lows are just not as low as they are with Jackson Carman right now. The highs may not be as high, but the lows are not as low. And right now, as that stands as the weak link along that offensive line, you kind of just need someone that's just going to stand pat. And maybe that's all Volson's going to be, and that's okay. But for right now, when you've got a complete retooling of the offensive line, you just need a guy that the lows aren't going to absolutely devastate a drive, a play, a game. And right now, Volson, even as inexperienced as he is in the NFL, that seems to kind of be who he is. And boy, John, have we come a long way from people clamoring for Cordell Volson to start at left guard when just in April everybody said he was the fans were saying this was my least favorite pick in the draft. Yeah. Who was this guy? I can't believe they picked this guy. And now we are believing and or clamoring for him to start over Jackson Carman at left guard. It's kind of crazy how things have changed.
There's also a coping period with Jackson Carman for sure. After they didn't really address left guard, it's like, oh, well, there's a year or two jump that could be possible for him. And then again, we didn't hear anything on the field bad about him up until August. So there wasn't anything that kind of went against those coping mechanisms. But as soon as that Cardinals game happened, yeah, Volson, let's see what you got.
Yep. And I think that's honestly, heart of hearts, gut of guts right now. That's kind of where I think the Bengals are with this right now. I think they're just saying, we've tried and we're still going to work with Carman. We're still going to see, again, still a very young player. In terms of age, I think he's younger than Volson, isn't he? He's 22 and Volson's 24, I think. Mm-hmm. So, there's still some developmental time there, but it's also, as we talked about with how hard it is to create a perennial winner, a perennial contender, you got to seize the moment here now quickly. And, if it's, again, the offensive line has been a big weakness of this team really for the past handful of years. And now you've retooled things and you just can't afford to let one potential weak link, whoever that may be, you can't really afford to have that right now. And it seems right now that Volson is a less weak link than Jackson Carman, if we can say that. And Volson has shown some nice things, obviously, in the preseason.
And you know what, Sage, Ohio? You want a decent offensive line? I'm telling you, regardless if it's Jackson Carman or Cordell Volson, the line is at this point decent. You got four pieces that are at the bare minimum quality starters. Two of them, I would say, are high quality compared to the others at their position around the league. The line is it's at a legitimately good spot. And what happens with left guard remains to be seen, but I think you'll get what you're asking for in a decent line.
Yeah, and then, last year, the entire right side of the line, you had questions on, even with Riley Reif, and obviously into the postseason, not great. So seems to be far improved. But John, thank you for everything today. Thank you all for your great questions. We went long on this one. It's been a little while since we've done it, but it's been a hell of a lot of fun. We answered questions from a number of different avenues, text, email, all kinds of stuff. So live chats, we appreciate you all tuning in, submitting questions and everything. Anything else that we should address before we hop out of here, my friend?
Any score predictions for tomorrow?
Score predictions.
I'm kidding. You don't have to answer that. You don't have to answer that question.
Yeah, I think it'll be something weird. It'll be like 19 to 16 or something.
Any fights tomorrow? I guess is the better question.
Yeah. We might see a little bit of a scuffle or two.
Yeah.
I don't think there's going to be anything like we witnessed yesterday, but I think there might be a little bit of extracurriculars. What about you? Kerfuffle. I like that word. By the way.
Kerfuffle. It might not be a kerfuffle. It might be a slight bickering. You know, it might be some chitter chatter here and there. But nah, I think they kind of got the message from yesterday.
Yeah, I agree with you. Well, enjoy the game tomorrow, and what if you need to catch up on Bengals stuff, not only can you go to cincyjungle.com to get all the articles and everything there, but we've got a lot of cool stuff on the podcast channel, be it from Talking Football with Bengal Jim and Friends. They had Mike Watts, the TV preseason voice of the Bengals, on their program this week. Matt Minnick brought a great episode, and then we had our show complete with an interview with Sam Hubbard. And then, we've got this to get you all set up. And then, of course, we'll get you all kinds of analysis on the website after the game, during the game, all kinds of stuff. And then we'll have a post-game show and all kinds of different things next week as we charge to the regular season. And it is right around the corner. It's crazy. But John, have a good weekend, my friend, and enjoy the game.
I will talk to you next week, man.
All right.